Hello, everyone. Today I'm talking about Assassin's Creed, the original from 2006 or 7, I think. This game is it's really interesting. I really like it personally, but there are some things about it that are definitely very broken. But there's some things about it that are just I don't know how to say. Very classic and iconic, and just a certain mood and atmosphere that you can't get again. So, right off the bat, what inspired Assassin's Creed? Well, it's very obvious that for those of you who played Prince of Persia: The Two Thrones, the prince dons a white robe and red sash in that game. So, it's very obvious that the team that worked on those games, at least in the story department or design department, definitely worked on this game. So that's kind of where we're coming from. It's like this ancient, Middle Eastern world that is very foreign to us, and we're taking the lore of that world and turning into this fantasy. Whereas Prince of Persia started as an almost Disney-esque kind of vibe, it's slowly transformed into an edgier, more epic, noble kind of set of ideas and themes. Assassin's Creed, it takes that kind of epicness, but involves things like conspiracies and, ancient secret orders and all these cool things about, how the ancient Illuminati or assassins or Templars, whatever, actually control the world. And so it goes into these ancient orders, essentially, and turns it into part sci-fi, part conspiracy, which is two very cool things to combine into a beautiful package. So the gimmick of Assassin's Creed essentially was or is that you actually start the game out in modern day and in this very white walled clinical office building, a employee of a company called Abstergo. And essentially you find, or you are an employee that is told to get inside this machine called the Animus. And so this machine, essentially, it recreates memories of your past ancestors. And it's this cool thing where you rediscover history by reliving through your ancestors' past, which I think is just, like, in general, such an amazingly cool concept. The fact that you can actually go back into the past and then have a virtual simulation or recreation of what happened. And so that's what I love about Assassin's Creed, and what I love about a lot of games that kind of imply that the world you're in is not real. And it definitely makes sense for a game in this era. This is, around the midpoint where graphics and cutscenes and technology was improving at such a rapid pace that we're kind of almost getting realistic graphics, but we're still stuck in the uncanny valley somewhat, where certain faces are not photorealistic enough yet, and to fully render them as that with any kind of artistic styling on it is almost weird looking, essentially. So again, it's this reality where you're in a pseudo reality where things are kind of real and are based on reality. But if you deviate from the parameters of the simulation, if you kill civilians, if you leave the area, if you try to swim, because apparently they can never program swimming in these games, you will not die in the game, but you will desync. So if you die in the game, you have to leave the Animus in real life. And it's a very, very cool concept. Whoever came up with this, well, actually, we do know who came up with this, Jade Raymond at Ubisoft Montreal, and she was kind of seen as the main creator of this really creative product. And like, I have to just like give a shout out to her, because this is one of my favorite, not of my favorite games, my favorite series of the next gen consoles. It was so insanely interesting and creative. I remember when the trailers first came out, they decided to use Moby, of all things. They were going for a very distinct mood that was not like, oh, you play as an epic guy in some epic time period doing epic things. It's like, no, this is a weird kind of simulation that doesn't technically make sense. It doesn't meet all of your expectations. Because they know they're in a game world, you can do a lot of more things without it being kind of too weird looking and being too self-aware, like, oh yeah, you can't actually do that. Again, the mood of this entire game is so interesting because it's you're filled with this area of intrigue around these ancient orders, and it's a historical piece. But again, as I said, because it's kind of a simulation and you kind of know it's not real, it feels otherworldly, and it does in a way make you feel like you are back in the past and that things are surreal, and all the weird, like the fact that the NPCs are broken and say the same lines over and over again. It's almost more realistic because you're in a simulation of the past. I don't know. It's such a cool concept, but I need to move on from that. But on that though, the music in this game is also extremely powerful and I would say iconic. The music really sets a mood and a tone where you really feel like you're in this weird, ancient, and holy city. So I should talk a little bit about the actual setting. So what time period do they choose to go back to in the main character Desmond's history? You play as Altair, an assassin who lived in the Middle East, and the cities you'll travel to are Acre, which would be modern-day Lebanon, Jerusalem, of course, in Israel, and Damascus in Syria. And this is during the time of the Crusades, or post the Crusades in the 12th or 13th century. I don't remember exactly which one. Another big gimmick of this game was also the fact that you would have a series of weapons, but the most iconic one is the Hidden Blade. This blade essentially is a gauntlet with a retractable knife in the wrist component, and essentially you would retract it by you'd have to have one of your fingers cut, which was part of joining the order, and part of that is that you would be able to retract this hidden blade from your wrist guard and assassinate someone close quarters, and this was the main thing that drove the game. The second thing was the iconic leap of faith, where one of Altair's mechanics is he would leap from huge places and fall through the 3D environment, and he would always land in a haystack, and somehow he would always come out completely unfazed, which is I think really funny, interesting. So exactly, so whose side is Altair on? Well, Altair is part of a pseudo-monastic order of assassins. Essentially these mystics who aren't quite Islamic themselves, but they are kind of part of their own sect and their own culture, and they have this fortress in the mountains, which is a very cool place called the Castle of Masyaf, and your main antagonists are the Templars, which is a very cool take on the whole setting. And of course, as most people may or may not know, most of the Templars throughout history were actually French themselves. So it's interesting that Ubisoft, a French studio, is making this game. I think it adds a lot of interesting context to it. And so essentially, you also have throwing knives, a sword, and your fists to also fight people with. So the basic story is Altair is a assassin of this order. And honestly, I'd recommend to read up on the history of the assassins themselves. It's actually quite interesting. The actual lore of it was where the word assassin comes from, and as I'll tell you guys, is from the word hashish and hassassin. And hashish is basically the derivative of opium. And so it essentially was this drug. And so why a drug? Essentially, it would be this kind of almost hallucinogenic depressive, and what would happen is that the user would essentially start hallucinating and kind of trip out and whatever, and it'd be used in these ceremonies. And apparently this ancient master and mystic would drug young men and essentially bring them into this garden area where he'd have while in the midst of their stupor, he'd have women dote on them and, give them pleasure and, give them food and wine and drink. And the entire idea was actually to simulate the Garden of Eden or heaven. And basically, when they come out of it, they wake up somewhere else. And the idea is if you want to go to that place again, then you must fight and die for our order. And it's a very interesting thing that gets into maybe sort of Sufism and other kinds of esoteric sects of Islam and such as that. But overall, I digress. What I do mention it, though, because in this game, as players will know, there is a garden, in fact, in the back of the castle. There is the mysterious master who's in charge of everything. And so it very much lines up almost with that. There just is no drug use, at least none that the ESRB has told us about. So... And so the story is that this master of this assassin's order, the Templars and the Empire of Saladin, essentially at war in the Holy Land, and he is looking to control each side or take out who is the most corrupt and restore order to this war-torn, middle-aged holy place. So the basic gameplay of Assassin's Creed is as such: you essentially have a map. A button mapped to each part of the body. So you'll press A to essentially jump, and so you'll press X to use your sword hand, B to use your right hand to grab, and Y to activate Eagle Vision. Eagle Vision is an aspect where you can essentially see all the enemies in red, all the civilians in blue, and your target in gold, and that helps you track down them in a crowd. You also have a sensor to show, how much health you have when you are in sight, when you are, suspected and caution, and when you have been detected and alerted. I think when this game was first coming out, people were describing it as a stealth game. It is very much not that. I mean, there are stealth sections in this game, but they are not the main kind of focus. A lot of the stealth sections involve going around a place, but if someone catches you and spots you, you can just kind of take them out, and it's not a huge deal. Other parts of the game, you will have to follow different kind of people and listen to them throughout the city and eavesdrop on them while keeping your distance and them not spotting you, while also being able to get the conversation, which is going to be a staple mission copy-pasted throughout the entire series, basically. It's the easiest thing and most boring part of the game, but it is there. The one cool thing I love about this game is it introduces, I don't know what I would call it, but dynamic modes, or modes, or action modes in games. Essentially, so as I said, you A, B, X, and Y do all the 4 parts of the body. However, when you hold R, the right trigger, suddenly everything transforms into a more extreme version of that. So if you were to hold A, you would actually do a blend mechanic, which is very iconic, again, of this series, where essentially if you stood by a bunch of monks who also had a bunch of white robes and looked very similar to you, as they showed in the main trailer, you would blend in with them and basically disappear into the crowd, and your notification would cease. You can, of course, hide in bales of hay, miniature tents, and other kinds of benches and other places around the city, and that's another main mechanic of the game. If you were to press B, you might shove someone aside, but once you hold down R, A is going to make you jump, B is going to make you grab someone and push your way through the crowd, X is going to make you whereas a normal X prompt might, if you have the hidden blade equipped, is going to make you assassinate someone in secret, very casually, just kind of stab them in the back or the neck. By holding down R, you fully jump on them, and it's very obvious to everyone around you that that person is now dead. And unfortunately, Y, I don't believe does anything. The action mode. However, also when you hold down R, you can now run automatically, and what I love is that as soon as you approach a ledge, Altair will automatically jump I don't know why, for me, that was such a big deal or so interesting, because the only time I've ever seen that done is also The Legend of Zelda. And I feel there's a very interesting kind of vibe or crossover between these two games where, I don't know, it's a very strange world, and you're a mostly silent protagonist with a hood going on these strange adventures, finding these, you know, uh, strange weird creatures. It's not as fantastical as Zelda, but it shares some of it the same DNA in some way, I feel. I just can't put my finger on it besides that very obvious jumping mechanic. Speaking of that, you can also ride horses in this game. There is an overworld that you can go through. I'm not sure if you can, I'm pretty sure you can fast travel in this game. You can definitely fast travel in the sequels, but essentially you have this place called the Kingdom, and it's a pretty cool environment actually. And horse combat is pretty, not the best, but it's not archaic and it works pretty decently. The one thing I do have to say about this game, which is an absolute drag and a bore, and I know because I've actually done it not too recently, but I didn't do it when the game came out, is the collectibles for this game are just not fun, let's say. They're very small, they are shiny, but there's so many of them. There's these little flags or feathers and things, and your reward for getting them is pretty much literally nothing. You don't, get anything for getting them. I think maybe like a costume or something, but a lot of these collectibles just don't matter in the long run, which is kind of frustrating. And I followed a guide, and some of these things are in places I would never think to look. Like the only way you're finding any of these, or most of these, is by looking for them via guides and stuff. I think now is a good time to talk about combat. So combat works in an interesting way. Essentially, once an enemy realizes you are engaged with them, you can hold like L to lock on, and then you go into combat mode. And once in that mode, your movesets change. If you press A, you will sidestep. If you press B, you will grab the enemy. If you press X, you will of course attack. And again, Y is eagle vision, and you hold R to guard. I think the most iconic and honestly fun aspect of this game is when you use the counter mechanic. So an enemy attacks, you're guarding with R and you press X, you will actually do an insta-kill if you time it right. And that's a very, very super satisfying. You can get into these counter sprees, if you will. And, if you don't, get all of them, it's, you can always, try again. But it is a very cool and fun kind of loop to go through. Again, because early in the game, because you are an assassin, people, will be very suspicious of you and will look for you. And one of the main things that is going to become a staple going forward is in each part of the city, you will find different, scholars or characters or just general people who are being harassed by the city's guards. And the implication is that they're all just corrupt. And so as you save the people, kill the guards, you unlock different districts in which, the people now will help you. And in fact, if you're trying to run away from the guards, a lot of the bystanders will actually grab them and hold them down while you escape. One thing that's fun in this game is, of course, the chase mechanic is really cool. There are certain animations where if you dive through a stall or something as you're running, you can get away faster. A lot of the big thing about this game that people really were awed by is the fact that you can climb any geometry in the map. Basically everything or almost everything is climbable, and you can basically get into places and areas that are really interesting. It's interesting in the Prince of Persia games and other games, maybe it was the fixed camera, but I never really liked or cared for the climbing of, objects or like through the environment. Usually it was very like scoped and focused, and maybe, the camera didn't do a good job of it, but I never really enjoyed even in Uncharted, like, okay, time to climb, the crumbling thing. I wonder if this part is going to fall. Yep, it falled. It's such a predictable, almost scripted sequence. But I think it works in Assassin's Creed because the world is essentially a kind of open world. There is no set path, and so when you are escaping from the guards, if you've been through that city multiple times, you know where everything is, and you know the best way to get away from them. And also, you can surprise yourself as you climb the geometry, because you might be able to get into a place you didn't think you were able to, and basically escape. And I think these games definitely inspired a whole slew of a renewed interest in parkour, which I find very funny and very predictable, let's say. And maybe I think France has its own style of parkour. They're very big on it. It's its own thing. Whether inspired by this or inspired to this, it's a phenomenon for sure. There's also something very satisfying about climbing to the top of an object from a gameplay perspective. It's very funny. It's very fun to get to the top of something, and then they'll also have this mechanic where you will press Y to sync with that structure, and so that will reveal it on the map, a mechanic that is still used today in games like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And then you usually jump off, there's always be a little ledge you can jump off, and you can get back to the ground so you don't have to, travel all the way, and that allows you to get back into the gameplay of combat. So it's a very great gameplay loop of combat, exploration, and stealth, all working as a Abstergo triangle logo in concordance with each other. Again, what keeps the gameplay interesting is, again, the counters. I should have mentioned this, but it's not always the same counter. There are 7, 8, or a dozen different animations for different styles of counters, and they'll be done. Each one will be done from 4 or 5 different angles. So it's always really fun to do that, because you're always going to find something else. I would say the sound design and UI design of this game is really interesting because the entire concept is that you're not actually in the Middle East. You're not actually in the Middle Ages. The whole overlay of the game is framed as an actual user interface. This is what, the computer system that, your user interface that you're using to interact with this world is the same one that your character in the canon is also using. And that just adds a really cool kind of meta layer that you literally are Desmond in the real world. And yeah. I know, I love those kind of things. Also in the cities, you will have these assassin hideouts where you can basically get your mission. The way the story unfolds is you arrive to a city, help someone out with the problem. You sometimes see the target do something heinous, killing someone or poisoning someone or breaking someone's knees or boasting or something. You go to the assassin's hideout, you get details about this guy and how he has to die. Then you leave the hideout, work your way to the district where he is, and basically take him out. And then there's a little story bit. So every time you assassinate a main target, it has this weird slow-mo, almost Shakespearean aside where you and that target have a conversation, even though you've just stabbed him, about his goals, intentions, and kind of a bunch of exposition that happens that brings you up to speed. And then there's another cutscene where you end up back in Masyaf, and the Grandmaster Al-Mualim gives you a little speech about your work and what you're doing and how you're gonna bring peace to the Holy Land and all this stuff. And then you go on the next mission. And so there's about 10 of these throughout the entire game. And again, the one big problem, I guess, with Assassin's Creed that people did complain about, and I think rightfully so to an extent, is that the game is very repetitive because you just do the same thing over and over again. The only thing that really changes is, if you're grinding to, unlock all the parts of the city, or, if the target you're assassinating has an interesting character, or the area where they are held up and guarded in is very well fortified or differently fortified. It might be a church, it might be a military castle, it might be a market, it might be someone's palace, but the layouts are usually very, very similar, and really it's the characterization that really makes things feel different. Throughout the course of the game, you also upgrade things like your health, the number of throwing knives you have, which I should have mentioned. Throwing knives, you just use those on the D-pad, and when you select it, you will throw it, and it will usually be a one-hit kill from a ranged attack, so that's very useful. You also have your fists for, special missions, really. There's no reason to really use your fists to fight, but you can, since it is a game about assassination and fighting. You have your sword, which is going to be your main thing you use when taking out multiple targets. I should mention you can use your hidden blade to counter, but it's very, very difficult and becomes much easier in the future games. But yeah, a lot of the game is very repetitive. You kind of do the same kind of missions, especially how you get to the missions, the lead up to that mission. They might mix it up with, stalking someone or taking out a sub-target or, intercepting a piece of mail or something. But for the most part, it's very kind of repetitive. But personally, I didn't mind it. I thought that the characters were actually very strong, especially in this first game. What really struck me was the Christian hospital in Acre, because there's this one guy who is the headmaster of this hospital, and he is a fanatical control freak. So when someone tries to leave, when they say, "Oh, I'm healed," he says, "No, you're not. You're actually insane." And what he does is essentially he breaks this sane man's legs and puts him back in the hospital. And so that was like, oh my god, this guy actually needs to die. He's actually crazy, because he's saying he cares, but he actually is totally corrupt. The dialogue and voice acting in this game is very good. There's some very iconic lines about Saladin and his armies marching towards Jerusalem. The amount of times you hear that line might be a little bit crazy, but it does happen. There are other cool things like the town criers who give the news of the week. If they see you and you're wanted, they can say, "Oh, someone get that man." Something I should mention is one great mechanic in this game is the chase mechanic. I mentioned it before, but when you assassinate a target, essentially the next big objective or goal is to escape from the army. So there are two options, really. You can stand there and fight, but you are going to mostly be overwhelmed. There are ranged units, and you can't counter 1,000,000 units while also being shot at by 1,000,000 arrows. And so your goal is to take out some guys while also escaping the environment. I should mention that for whatever reason, the chase theme in this original game, it never came back, or at least not to my knowledge. And honestly, it is the best chase theme I have ever heard. It's literally just called Chase, and it sounds exactly like what it is, and it has these big clanging bells and these vocals that have this echo effect, and this big kind of drum beat that's like alternating 1 2 1 2, and it almost sounds like something out of like the Bourne Identity movies or something. And it's just a super fantastic theme and a theme for this character in this franchise. And they didn't bring it back for the other ones. I don't know why. Maybe they did, and I just don't remember. It's so iconic. But yeah, instead of going through different levels, you go through different memory sequences. And so the idea is, when you get all the flags, collectibles, locations, and helping people, that goes towards synchronization. So again, the way you build your health in this game is through synchronization. So the more synced you are with your ancestors' DNA in this simulation inside the Animus, is how they deal with all of the interesting little pieces. You do get different moves as the game progresses. They're not super useful, but they are interesting. One thing that I thought was interesting is, or that's fun to do, I'm pretty sure this is a broken mechanic, but if you grab an enemy and throw them into a piece of scaffolding, the entire scaffolding will collapse, and any enemies just like in the general radius of that scaffolding end up like insta-dying. And it looks kind of silly, but I actually love it when that happens. It's actually a ton of fun to just take out a whole bunch of guys all at once. But yeah, the atmosphere in this game is very, very strong. I mean, the sequels do have it, but in here it's the strongest, where they really want to make you feel, again, like you're not actually in Jerusalem, but in a simulation of Jerusalem. And that in itself, this weird simulation of the Holy Land in an ancient time, I don't know, it has a dreamlike quality to it that the other games simply don't have, and that's what I really respect this first one. Which I guess brings me to the topic of what this series is. When this game first came out, I was super hyped about it. I thought it was super cool, and I was so excited about every Assassin's Creed after that until a certain point. I think even when Assassin's Creed 3 had come out, I was like, okay, that was cool. But after that, I kind of felt like they really lost the point of this game, which is that you're not actually just a random guy in a random time period, that you actually do have an overarching story. And honestly, the overarching story in the real world is not very interesting. It's honestly kind of boring. And the other thing, too, is that Desmond as a character is just like he's just bad. He sucks. He's like a blank slate that is not terribly interesting, but in a way he's kind of charming in that he's a blank slate, I guess. I'm not sure how to say it, but in this first game he probably has the best characterization, and in the later games he just does not. He just doesn't work. I don't know. And they kind of know he doesn't work, so they kind of put him in the background. But over the course of the series, Assassin's Creed got more and more about the actual time period rather than about the actual kind of interesting lore and like sci-fi aspect of it. And to the point where it's like, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you are just a, Valhalla guy. You were just an assassin in this time frame, or you're just a Viking. And it became Viking Simulator, it became Egyptian Simulator. If you played that game and said, like another Assassin's Creed game, you wouldn't be able to really, tell that they were the same franchise, other than, oh yeah, we're assassins, by the way. So that kind of whole mentality kind of went out the window, unfortunately. Also, the other fun thing I can think about Assassin's Creed, this is the very first time I saw the warning or message on the front of a game. Usually when you start up a game, it says, oh, be aware, if you have seizures, blah, 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 because I guess the history of the 1% or 0.1% of people who do get seizures from video games, they kind of mention them, in the opening thing. However, in this game, it says what it says, this game was made by a diverse team of different cultures and beliefs. And I found that really interesting that, oh yeah, we're going in deep, And I'm not sure if that was done for legal reasons, as to like not be like offensive, but I always interpreted that as, oh wow, we really have like, an interesting in-depth connection and history with these games. Like you're going to get so much actual history that you're going to wonder if you actually went back in time or something. And that is something that the games get better at as time goes on, is that they are better at basically kind of doing a little bit of education about the time period. And they are interesting, rare time periods. Like this isn't, Middle Ages England or, the Wild West or whatever. This is a very unique time frame where it's the Middle Ages and the Crusades in, in the Holy Land. So it's something that just, to my knowledge, isn't really done or has ever been done in a capacity like this before. And again, the whole dreamlike state, the UI and the sound design really help administer that kind of unique vibe. But this is the game that really started the whole probably billion-dollar franchise. Like these games always sell. They are so hot and so huge. And although I don't play them anymore, I'm still so glad to see them flourish. At least, you have interesting time periods that are being tackled and interpreted, and I think it's really cool. And yeah, like I said, what is nice about this game is that Desmond and Altair, they have their own stories. They are not just blank canvases for the character. They have their own motivations and desires. They are part of the story, and they have their own type of characterization, and they're not just a self-insert bland character, which unfortunately is the case with future games, but we'll get to that eventually. Something that I think was also very interesting is that during cutscenes, I guess to make the player still feel engaged, there's certain things will flash on the screen as a note that you can press the buttons to change the camera perspective, and it will show you other things in the past or the future or what they're referencing and talking about, which I thought was a neat little thing. And I think I have one. I'm missing like one achievement in this game where I didn't talk to Lucy. So after every chapter, you exit the Animus, and they say, "Oh yeah, I know you're syncing up well and whatever." And they kind of keep it ambiguous whether or not this is kind of real or not, whether or not you're changing history or recreating history. And so I love how there is this sense of uncertainty and mystery around Abstergo itself. Like, what do these guys actually want, and why are they paying me to relive these memories so they can get certain information that could lead them to an artifact that could potentially, rule the world? And that kind of main storyline thing really doesn't, unfortunately, come back. It's kind of the strongest in this game, and then it kind of appears in the other games and slowly and steadily becomes almost non-relevant, which I think is a huge shame. Something I do have to say about this first installment, though, is that while it is 90% good in terms of its basic mechanics, about 5% of the time, you are going to do an action or try to climb a wall or a part of a wall or something, and you are going to the game is going to do something you did not intend or want. You're going to try to jump to a platform, and you're going to jump all the way to the left and into the ocean and die. There's definitely a few times more than a few times that does happen in this game. Again, it works 95% of the time, but the one time it doesn't, it is absolutely infuriating. But yeah, that is something that gets much better as the game goes on, but almost to an extent where it almost railroads you a little bit. But again, there are goods and bads about this game, but I love this game. It's such an interesting setting. It is such an interesting mood. Despite it being repetitive, it is very entertaining, and it's a lot of fun. It's very cool. And it's, the one of the great 3 franchises besides, I think, No More Heroes and Mass Effect. This is one of the big franchises of this generation that I just absolutely adored and thought was definitely one of the best. Anyway, with that all said, I think I've talked enough about this game, and I should move on to the other ones. But yeah, this is the game that started it all, and it is still in great condition. I would definitely check it out, and I'll see you guys later.